welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to a special programme on the Tory leadership race. At one point, it looked as though the election to determine the next leader of the Conservative Party would have more contestants than the Eurovision Song Contest. And even a panicky change of rules from the all-powerful Backbench 1922 committee has only taken the field down from unlucky 13 to 10 runners entering the starting stalls this morning. The great sporting spectacle of Royal Ascot begins next week, and this is how the Tory hopefuls line up at the post. And in today's show, we asked Doyen Conservative commentator Peter Oborne to assess the prospects of the race, which will determine not just the next Tory leader, but the next Prime Minister. Over the next week or so, Tory MPs will whittle the field down to just 2, and then just over 100,000 Tory members will choose the next Prime Minister for the rest of us.
Studying the results of any race, you have to look at ability to form over course and distance. Have they got the class? Look at the ownership, the trainers. You've got to make all of these assessments. Can they cope with the going? Have they taken any noxious substances? All of these matters need to be taken into account.
But first, to your tweets and messages and emails in response to our show of last week on the state visit of President Trump and the politics of protest. John says, a great interview with Red Saunders, founder of Rock Against Racism, on this week's show. Bob says, social media is probably one of the best, worst, as most people read whatever is posted and believe it immediately. Then any retraction is only believed by people intelligent enough to read it. Don says, really great show with very searching questions. Paul says, fantastic show, where guests are treated as such and also very informative. What I love is the diversity of guests and interviews with very interesting and intelligent people that we rarely see on mainstream TV. Keep up the great work, guys. Thank you very much, Paul. And finally, James says, what's the email for Alex in this show? Well, James, if you want to contact us, please email in at theshow@alexsalmond.scot. And of course, you can contact us via Twitter or our Facebook page. Now, as in all the best races, there is a keen betting market. This is how the latest odds look with the bookies. And so Boris Johnson is the runaway favourite. But as punters have found out to their cost since time immemorial, favourites do not always win. Alex turns to Daily Mail columnist Peter Oborne to give us the form and assess the prospects of the field.
Now, I'm delighted to be joined by our top racing pundit, somebody who's been studying the form, the trainers of the Conservative Party for many, many years. Peter Oborne, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
A great pleasure, Alex.
Now, when we're considering this new race at Royal Ascot, the Tory leadership stakes, what qualities do you require to emerge as the winner of this race?
Well, it's very like studying the results of any race. You have to look at ability to form over course and distance. Have they got the class? Look at the ownership, the trainers. You've got to make all of these assessments. Can they cope with the going? Have they taken any noxious substances? All of these matters need to be taken into account.
Let's start from the outside in and have a look at and this is no detriment to them, but as they would be described in racing parlance as the rags in this 10-runner field, that's Esther McVeigh, Mark Harper and Matt Hancock. Now, their prices currently are all 100 to 1 or over. Are any of them overpriced, in your opinion?
The one of those three I would look at with a little bit of seriousness and some attention is Hancock. He's clearly very ambitious, and he comes from the Osborne, the former Chancellor, George Osborne stable. Osborne's a clever man. He ran Cameron for the leadership in 2005.
But David Cameron wasn't 100 to 1.
No, but he was an outsider, and Osborne was the trainer. He was the chief strategist, and Osborne is running Hancock. It's very clear. And secondly, he's got David Lidington, the Deputy Prime Minister.
But it's somebody you tipped for the leadership.
Not for the leadership. I said he might be Prime Minister if something.
The caretaker, yes.
And that might have happened. But anyway, it's Lidington, interesting. So there's a bit of establishment support, there's a bit of quiet money. Those long odds is not unattractive.
But you think Esther McVeigh, Mark Harper, no hopers, basically?
Unfortunately, yes, although I think there's something quite sparky about Esther McVeigh. She brings a bit of something different. I like her. She's Liverpudlian. Might go well at Aintree, but we're not, unfortunately, talking about the Grand National here. We're talking about a flat race.
So we should keep our eye on Hancock, perhaps, in the future. But let's have a look at Rory Stewart. Now, he's been the surprise packet of the early stages of the race, hasn't he? He caused much more of a stir than might have been expected.
I love this runner because he is in the process of reinventing political discourse. The way he goes out and talks to people, not just talks, listens to people. This is very unusual. He appears to be unmediated, i.e. he hasn't got this team of spin doctors around him. He appears to be doing it on his own. But what I love about Stewart is he's doing it his own way.
Now, he's 33 to 1. And now, might I ask if you had a small investment yourself in 33 to 1?
I have done, actually higher than that, because I think even if he doesn't win this time, he'll become Tory leader in
All
due course.
proceeds to charity, of
Indeed. Course. No, it's important. I think that he's a very interesting player. He's really come from nowhere. He wasn't fancied at the start of the contest. Showed up very well in the early trials. The watchers have been very, very struck by him.
Let's go further down the field. Dominic Raab, he's 33-1 as well at the present moment. That is quite surprising because initially he was regarded as perhaps a much more live wire runner than 33-1. Where is the Raab campaign at the present moment, and might it spark into life?
I think Raab has a major problem. He's too young, he's too mechanical, he's too robotic, and above all, he's got the Boris Johnson problem, i.e. he and Boris are the two hard Brexiteers, and he can't really compete with Boris Johnson. And so Raab I think, will disintegrate quite soon. I never fancied him. I never felt he had a chance. I felt that actually he was overpriced entering the...
Now, one of his big backers, perhaps his trainer, is David Davis. I mean, why didn't David Davis stand himself as opposed to putting out this young, inexperienced horse, Dominic Raab?
Well, two reasons. One, I think Davis must be very scarred by 2005 when he started the contest of out-and-out favourite to beat David Cameron, and then he faltered and fell. And I think he's still very bruised. And secondly, I think it's because David Davis is a nice man. Dominic Raab used to work for him, used to be his researcher. He's a very gifted, intelligent man, Raab. He probably made Davis look rather better than he really was, because he was that good. And so Davis, I think, is doing this out of personal loyalty.
Now let's move on to someone who hasn't taken drugs. The Home Secretary, Mr Javid, I mean, he's 33-1 as well. I mean, the Home Secretary once touted as being one of the favourites, a bit of an outsider. Why is that?
He has a lack of spontaneity. Everything is very carefully calculated and contrived. He's guilty of being a machine politician. You would have thought, with that amazing background, son of a bus driver, first-generation immigrant, when he made a few million quid in the city, gone into politics, there would have been a bit more to him, a bit more swagger. But everything is so calculated. I wish that wasn't the case.
But some of his positions, I mean, he emerged from the Windrush scandal as one of the people on the right side of that. His arguments on immigration have been less prejudiced than the outgoing Prime Minister. The arguments about police numbers, he's, within the terms of being a cabinet minister, tried to position himself on the right side of that debate. Is there no kind of reward beckoning for being right on a number of issues?
Hasn't he changed his positions on these conveniently late in the day? I mean, when he was Home Secretary, until the current predicament, I didn't notice him being quite so brave, as now he's reshaping his positions to disavow positions he was responsible for
earlier. So you're accusing the Home Secretary of being a politician?
Yes, but all I'm saying is that these aren't long-standing positions as far as I can tell.
Now let's move on to what we might term the front-runners, the top four.
Don't rule him out, by the way. I think he's looking good at the moment.
So Javid could still...
I wouldn't rule him out of the contest at this stage.
Okay, but you haven't bet him personally?
No.
Right. Now, Michael Gove, in some ways, by far the most interesting horse in this contest, in the sense that, well, his background is quite interesting, but in previous contests, but he started off as a very, very strong second favourite to Boris Johnson. He drifted out alarmingly to 20, 25 to 1, but in the last couple of days his odds have started to shorten again, despite the cocaine, the LASIK revelation. So what now for Michael Gove? Is he too clever by half?
Well, I'll tell you what my theory about why it's been so damaging to him, the cocaine issue, whereas it hasn't to others. It's because there's a lot of people who are out to take revenge. You need friends in politics. And there are a lot of people who want to get rid of, who have long-standing grudges which they want to repay. One of them will be the friends of Mr. Boris Johnson, who will recall that he was stabbed in the back by...
In the front.
In the front,
in the back,
might even
and
betray.
every other appendage. An interesting thing about these two great rivals, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, they could be termed as coming from the same stable, could they not?
Not quite. Only Johnson comes from the Linton Crosby stable. The trainer, Linton Crosby, is the key figure in this contest because he's the best trainer by far. It's like having Aidan O'Brien and a Derby. Boris has got the man of the moment, Aidan O'Brien of this contest, Linton. However, both of them come from the same, what you might term loosely, the same ownership. They're both backed from the Murdoch press, and let's call that owners for the sense of. And so Gove, who was sent by Murdoch and was with Murdoch when he interviewed Trump, remember, a couple of years ago.
Something the president says he can't remember.
Indeed. Well, I think that Mr. Gove is fairly memorable, but not to the president. And then, of course, Murdoch dispatched his top political editor off to the United States to interview Trump, to get Trump to tip Boris Johnson. So, in other words, what we've got here is that Rupert Murdoch and Donald Trump are backing Boris Johnson very strongly here. And, of course, Rupert Murdoch and Trump are big, big Brexiteers. And, of course, this brings in Farage, because Trump's key political analyst as far as Britain is concerned is Nigel Farage. He takes his briefings from Farage.
So, in a word, let's finish with Michael Gove. Can he recover from that early setback of the cocaine revelations or not?
In my view, Gove is going to be very hard-pressed to recover. The way he had positioned himself was as the kind of compromise candidate between the hard Brexiteer Boris Johnson and the kind of more moderate rest of the party, and Gove had sort of was going to be the all things to all men candidate. And there's one particular reason why the cocaine revelations have hit him, is because he's got a lot of enemies who are determined to use that in order to really damage, ideally from their point of view, destroy him. And so there's a lot of this is about old feuds which are being settled.
Join us after the break when Peter Oborne narrows down the field to his predictions as to who will make it to the final runoff and who will reach the finishing post at the door of number 10 Downing Street.
Welcome back. I've been talking with Peter Oborne, a long-standing observer of Conservative leadership contests, and someone who's been assessing the runners for the contest that's going on at the present moment. Now, Peter, we're down to the final three in the betting as the odds stand this now. Let's talk about Andrea Leadsom first. Many people are surprised that she's still single-figure odds. We can't see the number of MPs backing her. So why is Andrea Leadsom so short in the betting market?
I agree with this point you're just making. I mean, Andrea Leadsom is a lively figure. She's been quite a good leader of the House of Commons. She ran last time and stumbled badly. Her course and distance form is dreadful. Any betting man would immediately write her off, and that's proven by the fact that she has only 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 MPs backing her. Now, I look at those odds, and I would personally put her at 500 to 1, 1,000 to 1, no chance at all. And yet there she is at 8 to 1. I cannot understand it. Doesn't make any sense. If you ask me, as somebody who's watched betting patterns over the years, sometimes you get fake markets. There's funny money coming for her. I think that's funny money. I don't know where it's from, what it's about. Doesn't make any sense to me. It could be somebody who supports her, wants her to is doing this in order to make her look much stronger than she actually is.
Well, can I offer two reasons? One is of the women in the race, she is the front-running woman, and maybe there are Conservative MPs who say, well, it might be a good idea to have a male and female going to the final two. And secondly, of course, there's always the prospect all these other people might blow themselves up. And she doesn't look like the candidate who's going to self-combust.
I agree. You could argue that she's learned her lessons from last time, and that the calculation here is because she's the hard Brexiteer, she's going to leave at the first possible opportunity. She's calculating that Boris Johnson will somehow implode, and Dominic Raab won't be able to take up the running, and then she will come through as the candidate of the hard right. Maybe that's what she thinks.
Now, let's come to the top two in the betting as they stand just now. Jeremy Hunt, a surprise packet in many ways, in the sense that during the early stages of this leadership race, he seems to have gained ground, gained stature, in a way which has surprised many people.
Hasn't surprised me. There are two, if you look at the form book, always, as you know as a racing man, the first thing to look at. There are two runners with the best form. The first one is Boris Johnson, who we'll come to. He's won a big election. And the second one is Jeremy Hunt. He's got the form book as a future Prime Minister. He's run a major Department of State for a long period. That's the Secretary of State for Health for 7 years. And that was, he didn't make any big mess-ups. He kept it under control.
Well, the junior doctors strike, I remember them campaigning outside St Thomas's.
Yeah, he was quite right about junior doctors, and they were and he did well. He handled that strike, saw them off, very, very good. And then the other one was the fact that he's now Foreign Secretary. It enables him to promote himself on the international stage.
But some people say he's only succeeded as Foreign Secretary because he's succeeded Boris Johnson.
That may or may not be true. And some would say that he hadn't succeeded as Foreign Secretary, he'd been absolutely useless. But be that as it may, it's given him the opportunity to mingle with world leaders. Donald Trump knows who he is, which is amazing, actually.
And one up in Michael Gove.
Yeah, exactly so. And it's given him a bit of stature. He's the establishment candidate. And that's very important because it means he's got the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It means he's got a lot of the big cabinet heavyweights. And he's going to go on attracting support. Watch as the other candidates fall out, as, for instance, Gove falls out. You will find most of the Gove supporters going to Hunt. I predict he's going to win win by quite a large margin in the first race. The race among the MPs. That's what looks likely.
And in a totally non-political way, of course, or perhaps apolitical way, could Jeremy Hunt be carrying the royal colours?
I wouldn't have thought that Jeremy Hunt was carrying the royal colours in this race. I would. We mustn't forget that Rory Stewart was he not tutor to the two princes? I can't remember, but. I certainly think that Boris Johnson won't be carrying the royal colours, let alone Michael Gove, who, as you will recall, disgracefully, it should have been the end of his political career, leaked a private conversation he had had on Privy Council terms with the Queen. I should say alleged, but it looked absolutely cut and dry. No question that he is the prime suspect. And that is an absolutely terrible thing to do.
Much worse than illegal substances.
I would say so.
And now let's get on to the favourite, the front runner, the man who's now odds on in the betting. 4-6 in the latest odds. Some books 4-7, which is a very short price for any horse race. Boris Johnson, is he a nailed-on certainty, as that price would suggest?
I don't think he is a nailed-on certainty. I think that 4-6 is too short. I wouldn't be touching it. Go to his advantages. He's won elections, like you. There are very few people in this country who actually won big elections. You've done it. Boris has done it. But very rarely happens. So he's a winner, and he's had experience of running London, and he's had experience in government. Although I don't think he was a triumph as a foreign secretary.
And the weaknesses?
He's not trusted by a great many people, hated even. You can imagine that if Boris wins, you will find certain figures actually quitting the Tory party.
So let's get down. I'm going to push you now, Peter, because every horse race must come to a conclusion. And this horse race, as you rightly said, is in 2 stages. So firstly, your tips for the final 2.
Well, I think that the parliamentary party is likely to pile on behind Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, with Johnson coming a very distant second. And then they go to the country, and that will be a month of hustings. And unless Mr. Johnson makes a real mess of things, he's likely to win among this very selective collection of people who are ardent Brexiteers, and quite a lot of them are great admirers of Mr. Johnson. At the moment, it looks like the final 2 would probably be Hunt versus Johnson, and out in the country, that is the race which favours Johnson.
Well, let's just take these 2, and let's say either one of them becomes Prime Minister. Jeremy Hunt becomes Prime Minister by a surprise, manages to get past Boris in the final straight. Something happens that allows him to win that race among the Tory activists. What would be his biggest problem as Prime Minister coming into the current situation?
Well, the big problem all of them face is Brexit, and the issue of getting through a deal which Mrs. May was unable to do, because we all know that Europe hasn't changed its mind. It's not.
But isn't there a possibility that Monsieur Barnier, Jean-Claude Juncker, before he retires, might say, "Oh, thank goodness, thank the Lord, it's not Boris Johnson. Let's give this nice man Jeremy a bit of a hand."
That is an interesting thesis, isn't it? That actually Hunt will say to these Brexit fanatics,
Après moi, le déluge.
No, simply say, if you really want Brexit, you're more likely to get it from me than from Mr. Johnson, who is regarded as something like the cat brought in Brussels.
So Jeremy Hunt's difficulty will be negotiating the Brexit iceberg. But Boris Johnson, if he becomes Prime Minister, he's got a really big problem in Parliament, has he not?
This is exactly right, that he command a majority in Parliament. And that takes us on to this very interesting remark that the Prime Minister, Mrs. May, said, that she wouldn't quit until such time as she was confident her successor could command a majority in Parliament.
You're not telling me the winner of the Tory leadership stakes is going to be the outgoing Prime Minister who's just resigned?
Well, it could, if you take her literally, and let's assume, therefore, that and I think this must have been intended to hurt Mr. Johnson. Johnson wins the contest in the country. He becomes Tory leader, but the Prime Minister says, well, I can't recommend to the Queen my successor until such time as I am confident that my successor can command a majority in the House. And then he can't do, and then it would become plain that once you've added up the Scots Nats and the Labour Party and Plaid Cymru and the DUP and 20 Tories who say we're not going to serve under Johnson or vote for him, that he can't. The House just says no, just give him a great big raspberry. And Mrs. May then sails off into the sunset as remains as Prime Minister.
Well, I doubt even if the late Julian Critchley could have thought of a political ending such as that. So what you're saying is there is a possibility that Johnson might emerge as the winner of the race, but be deprived in the steward's room.
Exactly. The Prime Minister, in consultation with other officials, will privately get rid of him.
So what you're saying is that the glittering prizes of 10 Downing Street may be a short-lived achievement for one Boris Johnson.
Absolutely. It may well be that whoever wins, actually not just Mr. Johnson, is not Prime Minister for very long.
And if you were to write a political novel about the circumstances of the last few years, would you have managed to come up with a plot which is quite as involved, as complex and unlikely as the one which is now unfolding?
I advise against writing novels. Real life is much more interesting.
Peter Owen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.
Many horse races throw up surprises, particularly when the stakes are high. After all, that's what keeps bookies in a comfortable living. In this case, there is a runaway favourite in Boris Johnson, but the race is still in its very early stages. Until his high-profile launch of yesterday, Johnson had been kept well out of the way, leaving his rivals to make the running and, of course, the mistakes. Now he is out and clear of the field with apparently unstoppable momentum. But there's many a slip between cup and lip and many a pitfall between now and the Downing Street winning post. Certainly his opponents believe there is always the live possibility of Boris blowing himself up. However, the biggest question of the leadership stakes applies to all of the runners. Those who want to deal with Europe have to explain how they can succeed where Theresa May has failed. Meanwhile, the no-dealers have to explain how they can get such a proposition past a parliament who have a majority across the parties determined to avoid that circumstance. It is precisely that possibility of a new deadlock between the winning Tory candidate and an unimpressed parliament which led Peter Oborne to float the scenario that the outgoing Prime Minister could hang around until someone else demonstrates they can command a majority of the House of Commons. A steward's inquiry after the race. For the winner to lose the race in the stewards' room is perhaps far-fetched. However, no candidate as yet has come up with a credible answer to the Brexit dilemma. And if the new Tory leader can't discover it and discover it soon, then the one thing that unites this fractious party becomes ever more likely. They are united in opposing an early general election. But that is exactly where they may end up, and into a new race where the people, rather than the Conservative Party membership, choose the next Prime Minister. And so from Taz and me and all at the show, it's goodbye for now.